Severance Season 2 has come and gone, but was it worth the 3-year wait? For the most part, yeah, I think it was. Alright, thanks for watching. Special thanks to channel members. It's easy to forget that this show did take so long now that we've finally gotten the second season, and with Ben Stiller promising that Season 3 won't take as long, hopefully this won't be another conversation, but TV shows in general have just been taking far too long between seasons. You think of a show like Lost that had upwards of 20 episodes in most of the seasons, and we still got those every single year. Now I know, television has grown so much over the past decade, budgets are so big, TV's way more cinematic, just like Game of Thrones. And yet, for the most part, we still got a season of that every year. So Severance had some enormous shoes to fill after the first season, and especially the cliffhanger of the first season. Each episode had to withstand the frustrations of waiting 3 years for an episode, along with a growing fan base that was able to binge the first season, so the slower parts of that season didn't feel so slow, yet with the second season, a lot of those slower parts are now getting criticized much heavier, whether they're warranted or not. So let's do a deep dive into the second season. I'm not gonna necessarily go episode by episode, but focus on a lot of the larger plots that spread across many episodes. I've got the chapters of the video in the description, so if you're looking for me to talk about any specific point, feel free to skip along. After the discussions on Season 2, I'm gonna jump into the future of the show, Season 3 theories, and beyond that. And I don't mean to brag here, but in my video on Severance Season 1, I was right about quite a few of my theories. I'll even add the proof of that in the theory section, so I might be onto something here, along with everybody else who's making videos on Severance like this. But without further ado, I'm not going to make you all wait 3 years for the video, so let's talk Severance Season 2. So the first thing I want to talk about from this season is Dylan. In the grand scheme of things, Dylan's storyline this season is a bit mundane and separated from the rest of the overall Lumen plotline. Now, I'm not saying that that's bad, don't get it twisted, because Dylan's storyline adds so much to his character and about this world in general. I feel like if this entire show wasn't a mystery and it was just a straight up drama, then most, if not all of the storylines would be like Dylan's in this season. The fact that his Innie and Outie are like two different versions of the same person, I mean, obviously, but how his Outie's wife can see different qualities in them, and how the Innie version reminds her of the way her husband used to be, adds so many layers to the relationships that only this show can really cover. And that's a pretty big theme of this season, the fact that there's dynamics and relationships and friendships that truly can only be portrayed on this show, and I think more so than the last season, this season takes full advantage of all of those opportunities. A wife cheating on her husband with some other guy is obviously a storyline that we've seen and has been done 100 times before, but the wife cheating on her husband with her husband is something we've not seen before. It's not even like you can compare this to like a twin or something. This is something wholly unique to this show. We really see just how burnt out or even flat out lazy Outie Dylan is. Even though he's not working himself, he's just gotten stuck in this rut of a routine, perhaps because not working and only doing the things you like each and every day when you come home can be a bit mundane. It's like that episode of SpongeBob where Squidward lives in Squidville, and he does everything he loves all day, all the time, and he eventually gets sick of it. When Dylan's fired, he goes searching for another job at a door factory, which I'm sure you're all aware is a reference to when Dan Erickson, the writer of the show, worked at a door factory and hated it. Dylan has this conversation with a guy who looks kind of like him. Maybe he's... No, I'm getting too far ahead of myself here. But this guy raises another great point about severance in this world. Why would he hire a guy who has had no work ethic for years and let somebody else do the work for him? This guy also has some moral qualms about Severance in general, but I think that was a really great point and is a valid reason to not hire somebody. Small conversations like this show us more about Outie Dylan, who we had only met briefly beforehand in the first season, but adds so much to this world in general. As for Gretchen, I thought for sure that this was not actually Dylan's wife at first. I thought this was another Lumen plant to try and get some insider info on the department, so I was really shocked when they showed Outie Dylan and Gretchen was actually his real wife. There were definitely a lot of conversations about this aspect on the subreddit, but I think a lot of the conversations around this plotline dried up as the season went on and other things happened and we saw where Dylan's whole storyline actually went. But I still find it incredibly strange that Gretchen was invited by Lumen to meet Dylan's Innie multiple times, and it wasn't this secret on the outside either. I remember a few people mentioning that since she's an EMT, maybe she's in Lumen's pocket and it might connect to Gemma's car crash, which could be a very real possibility, and I think this whole aspect of the show definitely has some more potential to be explored, crazy theories included. But what I love about this storyline, as compared to the rest of the season, is how it pretty much ended. Sure, there are ways it could go on. Gretchen could be this secret Lumen employee, but she doesn't have to be. We saw her cheat on her husband with her husband's Innie. They had a fight about it, talked it out like adults. Outie Dylan says he wants to be better for her, and that was that. If that's the end of the Gretchen and this whole arc, I think that's a fine ending for both Innie and Outie Dylan. So next up, let's talk about Helly and Helena. Or should I say
Heleny?
Because this was, of course, a huge aspect and storyline heading into the season. With the reveal that Helly is actually an Egan and how she blew the lid off the whole Severance thing, it seemed like there was going to be some major repercussions. Seemed like. So in the second episode, we see that while this did some damage internally, there weren't really any repercussions on the outside. I was expecting at least some sort of news broadcast like we saw in season 1, or some more of the protests in the street, but we didn't see any of that this season. This whole reveal really only had repercussions within the Lumen storyline, not the broader world like we expected, or at least like I expected. So is that a bit disappointing? To me, yeah, it was. It didn't need to have these huge outside implications. It's just something to note going into the off-season for this finale, but more on that later. This is where I'm gonna pat myself on the back a little bit, because not only did I catch that this was Helena the whole time, this was something that I theorized back before the season even started. Maybe they'd remove her chip and send Helena down there to the severed floor so that way she can act in the way that would most serve the company. So yeah, whatever, it's not that big of a deal. But this was also something that was fairly obvious from the very first episode. Everything about this was a lot suspicious, and most everybody caught on to that super quickly. However, the character of Helena is still a bit of a mystery. I've seen conversations going in one of two ways about Helena. Number one, she's a manipulative sociopath who has only evil intentions for Lumen and the world. Or number two, she's jealous of Helly, is more of a puppet for the company, has extreme daddy issues, and doesn't really like her life. Personally, I fall more in line with the second camp of people. I think the most obvious route to take with Helena was to have her be this evil queen of the Empire, have her be like Helly's rebellious and angry side to the extreme, want all the Innies to know their place, but I don't really think that this is where they're going. Sure, Helena is very adamant that Innies and Outies are separate people, and I think for a while her whole
I am a person. You are not.
was true. She actually felt that way. But after seeing who Helly is, how she can take control over her own life and assert herself without the need to please anyone, I think more than anything, Helena liked being Helly. I think the most obvious hint to all of this is in episode 4 with her and Mark. For one, I think that this was something that Helena wanted to do first and foremost. I don't think that this was under the instruction of the company. I think this was her acting on her own. She might not have ever had any sort of connection with anybody in her life, and being Helly allowed her to do that. Same thing goes for later on when Helena, Jeff Bezos Egan, just casually strolls into a restaurant and asks her employee if he knows who she is. I also don't think that this was something that the company was forcing her into. I think that this was her going to meet with Mark under the guise that she was doing some surveillance for the company. But after the Ortbo failed, Helena's cover was blown, I do not think they'd send their general to go and do some surveillance work. And I don't think that she would just casually stroll into town unguarded to grab some Chinese food. I also have to give Britt Lower some major props this season because while some of the stuff they specifically showed us on purpose made it seem like, yeah, this was Helena, not Helly, her performance was believable enough to be Helly, yet it felt like something was off or something was missing. I chalk this up to Britt Lower doing this on purpose and really nailing the differences between Helly and Helena pretending to be Helly, not doing a bad job. Yet another thing that only this show can really get away with doing, and it was done masterfully by the writers and, of course, Britt Lower. But getting Helly back in episode 5 really made it clear that, oh yeah, this is Helly. This is why she felt so off earlier. And having to catch her up on everything that happened was insane for so many reasons, most notably with Mark. I've got a lot to say about their relationship and dynamic, but I'll bring that up a bit later. But speaking of Mark, let's talk about reintegration. Most notably, what the hell is it? PD in Season 1 gave us a pretty good indication for how reintegration works and the dangers that come with it. Mark starts the process at the end of the 3rd episode, and I thought, wow, that was really fast. I figured the pacing of the story would call for this to happen later in the season, maybe even set it up for Season 3, so for it to happen so early, I was incredibly intrigued to see where it would go, but it didn't really go anywhere. Innie and Outie Mark have a few flashes. Mark, of course, almost dies due to the process, but that was it. Sure, Ragabi said that she was better at it now, we saw him taking all these supplements to help, but the storyline didn't really add anything or change to the overall plot. Outie Mark didn't know exactly where to go to the testing floor because he saw his Innie do it. It was nothing like that or what I expected, but this time I am gonna say that this was poor execution, and I really hope that this storyline is expanded further in Season 3. With how huge of a plot point reintegration is, and for it to happen so early in the season, it doesn't seem nearly as impactful or eventful. I'm also going to talk more about this in the theories section, but basically, if the Innies are pulling off some sort of revolution and they refuse to leave, I hope that Outie Mark flashes inside to Lumen, and he eventually has to leave because his reintegration isn't complete. But we'll see. The first of 3 major episodes in this season was the 4th episode, Woe's Hollow. And right from the start, coming from the last episode where Mark started reintegrating, kinda expected this episode to be something different. Especially because there was just zero build-up for this event. An Ortbo wasn't mentioned in any prior episode, at least I don't think it was. There was no preparations for the Outies to be placed outside here, and a lot of this episode is still rather confusing. These strange CGI/animated lookalikes of the refiners, the story of Dieter Egan, the seal carcass, so much of this episode is way out of left field, super unexplained, and I feel like because of some of the later episodes, how insane this one was has kind of faded from people's memory. I remember seeing a lot of theories about how this was actually inside of Lumen, so they're able to get away with some of the weirder things, and that's still entirely possible, but I feel like this dead seal should become as big of a deal as the goats were in Season 1. And why on earth would Irving suggest that they eat it?
We should eat it. Pardon me?
It was, however, nice of Mr. Milkshake to bring them to the tallest waterfall in the world. No expenses were spared in doing that, so Lumen can't be that bad, right? A lot of people also brought up the point that this was the first time the Innies could ever experience sleep. And it's not a point that was mentioned in the show, so I almost kind of feel like this was something that the writers overlooked. Letting the Innies rest themselves could set a horrible precedent for the company going forward. If they're tired during the day, now they might just want to pull an Irving and fall asleep at the desk. Of course, good old Heleny had to ruin the marshmallows for everyone in a moment that I almost convinced myself, oh, maybe this is Helly, because this seems like a very Helly thing to do and say. But looking back at it now, it almost makes even more sense for this to be Helena, for the first time in her life probably, able to poke fun at her own company and story and principles.
I mean, seriously, that's actually the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
There was a brief moment of reintegrating when Mark sees Gemma over Helly's face, a promising start to what must be some crazy reintegrating scenes. Or so I thought. But the MVP of this episode, of course, goes to Irving. Starting the episode off with his point of view was a really good indication that this was his final hurrah, and oh boy, he went out like a damn hero. I was also surprised that it was only 4 episodes into the season when this whole Helena twist was unveiled. I know that there were a lot of indications in this episode that this was actually Helena, but I thought that they were going to drag it on and reveal it in the later half of the season. Though I'm incredibly glad that they didn't, I thought that enough time had passed, enough people had caught on to this, and the scene itself with the revelation is incredible. I loved seeing those edits people made from Helly's perspective, from 1 second getting tackled off a stage to the next second being drowned by Irving. It really puts into perspective how much time has passed, how confused and scared Helly must have been, and seeing Irving essentially sacrifice his life for her shows, just in the span of 2 seasons, how far the character of Irving has come. Speaking of Irving, this is a pretty big one. Irving is still, but especially now, the most mysterious character in the show. We know more about Helena, Outie Dylan, Cobell, Milkshake, even Gemma than we know about Irving, which is honestly very strange considering all the factors involved. Last season, Irving's Outie gave us a lot of different questions we were looking forward to exploring more in Season 2. Why is he painting the testing floor over and over again? How does he even know what that is? Why does he keep a list of Lumen employees and news clippings in his trunk? The answer is, we don't know. The season not only didn't address any of those things, but added more, like Irving speaking to some mysterious person on the phone, purposefully going to Bert's for dinner to figure out more about who he is, for what reason, we don't know. And now all of this would be fine and dandy if it weren't for the fact that John Turturro might not be back for Season 3. He said that he didn't like being in the offices of Lumen because the lights in there drove him insane, and he filmed Season 2 and feels fulfilled. Now that's great and all, but I don't feel fulfilled, and I don't think anybody else does either. If this is truly it for Irving as a character, I wouldn't say it's a bad ending, but I would call it disappointing. I'll reserve my judgment until I see what the final product is, but if we get all these questions on Irving's character answered without Irving being present, I'll for sure be at least a little bit disappointed. Throughout both seasons, Irving's Outie has been a huge question mark, and it's gonna remain that way into Season 3, and maybe forever. Is he talking to Ragabi on the phone, and next season she's just gonna be like, yeah, Irving and I used to talk before he disappeared, it's whatever. Like, okay, but it would have been cooler for Irving to reveal that, or at least have that revelation come from Irving's point of view. Of course, this is all assuming that John Turturro isn't coming back, which might not be the case, and I certainly hope that it isn't. The dinner scene with Bert and Fields was once again something that you can only do in this show. This guy, his husband's work husband, all having dinner together, though the husband and the work husband don't know each other, yet clearly in some capacity are attracted to one another. Yeah, what could go wrong here? There's so many layers to these conversations, and this episode ended with the revelation that Bert may not be who he seems. Except that he kinda was who he seems, since he eventually lets Irving go. I definitely say Irving's storyline this season was the one I'm personally the most disappointed with, simply because all the mysteries surrounding him are incredibly interesting, and absolutely nothing was answered. On a separate note, let's talk about a character that basically stole every scene he was in, and that's Seth Milkshake. Also, if I'm being completely honest here, Mr. Milkshake is such a dumb joke, but I think it works because it's such a dumb joke, and it's like the best thing that adolescent Innie Mark could come up with to insult him. But Mr. Milkshake took a big step up in Season 2. He was the natural replacement for Cobell, the man who stopped the overtime contingency, and if this season shows us anything, it shows us he's really not cut out for this job. Almost everything he tries to do ends up blowing up in his face. Yeah, let's have Helena come down here. I'm sure nobody will suspect anything. Let me give you guys a revamped break room. I'm sure nothing will be hidden in here that will give you guys the opportunity to blow the lid off this entire operation. Let's go on a company trip. I'll show you guys around the hollow, show you the tallest waterfall on Earth. I'm sure the future CEO of the company won't be in any danger whatsoever. Congrats on your 25th file completion, Mark. Let me get an entire marching band in here. I'm sure they won't be used against me if you guys manage to convince them to start an uprising. You guys see my point. And on one hand, it's like, haha, Milkshake, you suck at your job, it's what you deserve for making all these people's lives hell and going along with Lumen's plans. But on the other hand, we get to see an entirely different side to Milkshake this season. The incredibly strange, race-bent paintings of Kier, getting in trouble for, well, the stuff that he did wrong, but also using too many big words and clipping the papers wrong. I mean, come on now. There were an equal amount of times where I was like,
Fuck you, Mr. Milkshake.
And woohoo, go Mr. Milkshake, to the point where I don't even know how I feel about him, but I know he's one of the best characters in the show, and I can't wait to see more of him in Season 3 and his obligated dance sequence episode. Now let's talk Episode 7, Chikhai Bardo. Barbo? Chikhai Barbo? Chikhai Bardo. This is the second of the big 3 episodes of this season, but this one is definitely the most unique of the 3. For one, it's a half flashback episode, half side character episode. Now these episodes in every show are either really, really good, or so terrible that they're forgotten about in subsequent seasons. This one is one of the really, really good ones. Not only do we get to see hot Mark in the flashbacks,
turn around and bend over,
but we get a lot more insight into Mark and Gemma's relationship, the highs and lows of generally being in a relationship, her miscarriage, all the way to when she leaves and supposedly dies in a car accident. Contrasted with all these scenes is present-day Gemma and her dozens of Innies. This episode was particularly chilling because as fun as this show can be at times, and discussing the theories and hearing all the one-liners, at its core, this is a pretty dark show, and this episode showed us that head on. Lumen is keeping Gemma prisoner in the depths of this building, forcing her to go through test after test, experiment after experiment, all while being watched and having the guy who oversees her make creepy advances towards her and all of her Innies. It's so many different layers of messed up. It reminds you that people like Helena, Cobell, Milkshake, they're all in a lot of ways pretty irredeemable. Sure, there's lots of character development for these 3. Perhaps one or all will come around and make a complete 180 if they haven't already, but they've been complicit in this kidnapping and torture for over 2 years. I also have to give credit to Deacon Lockman as Gemma, because it didn't really hit me until this episode, but we've never actually met Gemma before. We've heard so much about her, and from what we've heard, it kind of seems like she's been a character all along, but this is the first episode where we've actually seen Gemma as Gemma, not as Miss Casey or anybody else. This episode is dark and depressing and heartbreaking in all the right ways. It's a good way to kind of refocus the narrative. Our characters need to take down Lumen. We need to root for that, and this is why. But these sorts of episodes don't always work out. Case in point, the very next episode. A lot has been said about the 8th episode of this season, It's so funny seeing people's initial reactions to this episode because on one hand, you have the day one Severance fans who are angry that people rated this episode low because everybody who isn't an OG week-to-week Severance fan must have TikTok brain, no attention span, they only like Marvel movies, they don't appreciate art when they see it, blah blah blah. Then you have the people who talk about how bad this episode is, how short it is, how nothing happened, how it's a waste of an episode. And while I wouldn't go that far, I also wouldn't say that this was a great episode. So to be the devil's advocate, this episode is still shot well, it tells the complete story, gives us more information, but a lot of it was also just establishing shot here, establishing shot there. It is very short, the shortest episode of the series so far. It felt like we were 15 minutes into the episode and it ended. And if you didn't like this episode because you waited all week and look forward to new Severance episodes every Thursday night, and this didn't live up to your expectations, then you have every right to be let down. It's really not all that deep. Not everybody has TikTok brain because they didn't like this episode, and if you like this episode, it doesn't make you able to enjoy art more than any other person. So let's get to the root of the problem with this episode, and that's the timing. Like I said, flashback or side plot episodes are very tricky and are entirely hit or miss. Somehow, Severance Season 2 had a complete hit and a complete miss in the same season. And the real issue here is how these episodes were placed back to back. End of episode 6. Mark might be dead. Oh no, episode 7. We get some updates on him, but now we want to go back and see what the other characters are up to. Where do Mark and Helly stand now? What's going on with Dylan and his Outies wife? Are we finally going to get any answers to what Irving's been up to? Oh no, we don't see any of our central characters. We only see Cobell. Now, if you don't like Cobell or don't find her interesting or this storyline all that interesting, then you're not going to like this episode. It's very simple. But a lot of people were asking for more Cobell this season because she was absent for a lot of it, so those people got what they wished for, just maybe not in the way that a lot of them wanted. For 2 weeks to go by, for everybody waiting week to week, breaking from our everyday lives in order to get immersed in the world of Severance, and not seeing the central characters that we used the free trial of Apple TV Plus to see, then you're gonna have people who are disappointed. I'm not going to act like I enjoyed this episode more than the average person. I think this was the first time in the history of watching the show that I was checking my phone during the episode. And no, it's not because I couldn't appreciate Cobell or her story and all the establishing shots. It's because I wanted to have more time with our core characters. That's it. However, this episode did reveal to us that Cobell was the mastermind behind the Severance procedure, as well as a lot of other things, like the Glasgow block that was used to keep Helly's chip from transitioning. This is a huge piece of information, one that, of course, will have major repercussions for the future, and we're just gonna have to wait and see how that all plays out. So was this episode necessary? That piece of information was necessary. I don't know necessarily if everything else, all the other characters that were introduced were important, but maybe they will be, and in Season 3, everything's going to make way more sense, and this episode is going to be looked back on much more fondly. Now, let's talk about the finale. If there's one thing we can count on for Severance, it's to deliver some of the greatest episodes in the history of television as season finales, and leave us on a pretty major cliffhanger. Except this season's cliffhanger isn't nearly as bad as season 1's, so if we really don't have to wait 3 years for the next season, and all these people binge the first 2 seasons to prepare, they're never gonna know the pain of what the season 1 finale cliffhanger was like. But that's, just a rant because I'm an OG week-to-week Severance fan, and you all have TikTok brains. This finale really gives us a good indication as to where Season 3 is headed, which is obvious, but when Mark asked what was going to happen to him if he followed through with their plan, and both Devin and Cobell didn't really have a response, it really hammered home just how complex this situation is. I think on paper, the plan they came up with was the same plan that the audience kind of had and expected. We wanted Mark and Gemma back together, so if they could just escort her upstairs and then out the exit, it's a happy ending for everybody. Except a whole other half of the characters, the Innies. Speaking for myself, I never really gave Innie Mark's situation a whole lot of credit or thought, and that feels weird to say that or to admit that. I love Innie Mark, and I love Innie Mark and Helly together, but this entire season was building towards Cold Harbor, building towards a Mark and Gemma reunion, and for them to escape. I was interested in Innie Mark's situation only as like a time being sort of relationship until the real one came through. And I'm not sure if anybody else felt that way, but seeing Innie and Outie Mark's conversation, it really changed my perspective because I felt like I was more so in line with Outie Mark and his line of thoughts, but Innie Mark brought up a whole ton of fantastic points. It made this entire sequence so much more thrilling because the question of what happens to the Innies after they complete this heist just hadn't really occurred to me. And that's really the central theme of the finale, and what I assume will be the primary storyline of Season 3, the mental battle between Innies and Outies. Helly makes a rousing speech to the band players about fighting for half a life, and while it seems fast that this entire department would just switch up off of one speech, it means that these sorts of thoughts and conversations are going on everywhere, in every department, and I hope we get to see more of that in Season 3. The rest of the finale is just straight up bananas. Another Milkshake dance number, a whole new department is revealed, Cold Harbor is revealed to be a new Gemma Innie taking apart a cradle, seeing if the emotional block would hold and that she wouldn't feel anything. Such a simple answer to the theory that really kept this whole season going. We get sort of an answer on the goats. They're being used as sacrifices. That, I guess, was pretty obvious, but I guess that's it. And Brienne of Tarth isn't taking that sitting down, so she kicks some Drummond butt, and then the baby goat goes free.
Emil thanks you.
I was saying to somebody, like, 2 weeks ago or something, how funny it was that Gwendolyn Christie's casting announcement for the season was such a big deal, just for her to only be in one episode. And then the finale happened, and I'm glad this character got the time to shine, and once again, hope to see more of her in Season 3. But speaking of Drummond, this episode goes in so many directions that I didn't expect it to the point that it kind of felt like watching a different show at certain times. Drummond catches Mark trying to get to the testing floor, so in response, he tries to kill him? What, Mark completes Cold Harbor, so he's just disposable now? What about his sister and the people who know him on the outside? You think she's just gonna stay silent on her brother going into work and not coming back? This felt so strange to me on so many different levels because would they have to go and kill Devin and Rickon too? Makes me wonder if this was more of a Drummond thing or if this was Lumen's plan all along. How many other people have they killed? If Bert's driving is any indication, then it seems like they've had their hand in a number of deaths. And that also seems to be a point that was a bit glossed over, how Lumen was planning on killing Irving and have killed God knows how many other people. It definitely raises a few questions about how things are going to be handled in Season 3 and beyond. But Drummond gets his comeuppance. We get the funniest scene in all of Severance.
Do it! No! 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 No!
And at long last, we get the chill-inducing reunion between Mark and Gemma. This is heartwarming, satisfying to see Jane go ballistic, and also funny to see Innie Mark and Miss Casey reunite under the strangest of circumstances. But then comes the ending. And I think this ending was pretty, I don't want to say obvious, because when you say something is obvious in writing, it seems like it's something bad, but it seems only right that this is how the season would end. A lot of people figured the ending of the season would be Gemma getting out, but Mark having to stay, and them trading places. The way we got here, though, is what makes this ending truly stand out. It would have been one thing for Mark to get this hero moment as he's saving Gemma, but he's tackled by Milkshake and forced to stay while Gemma escapes. But Outie Mark not even getting that choice to leave, and for the child half of him to make the decision is just perfect television. Outie Mark talked to his Innie like he was a child. He got Helly's name wrong, and Innie Mark decided to take this decision into his own hands. And on one hand, it's great to root for Helly and Innie Mark. I love them together. But at some point, you gotta give Gemma a happy ending, cause goddamn, this woman has been through enough. So was season 2 worth the wait? Yes, I think it was, but only just barely. I think the quality of the show was kept the same or even improved in some aspects. The pacing of the season was a bit off, but it gave us a complete story, a lot of answers, a few twists, and sets up season 3 perfectly. I think Severance joins a pretty prestigious group of shows where the quality doesn't take a major nosedive in the second season. I think you could say season 1 or 2 was better than the other, depending on how you look at it, and it would be a fair assessment. However, I don't think this show can go another 2 or 3 years without a season. I truly don't think any show has that power anymore, and with so many different shows waiting years between seasons, people just forget. They get bored of it, they don't feel like rewatching, and then they watch something else. I watched the first 2 seasons of Yellow Jackets on a binge that coincided with the finale of season 2 being released. Started watching season 3 not too long ago when it came out, but I forgot just about everything that was going on, and so I just turned it off. I don't remember what happens. I don't really feel like rewatching it. The recap didn't help me all that much. So that's just it. I'm not gonna watch that show anymore because the seasons took too long. Severance is a bit different for me personally because I make these videos on it, because I'm head over heels obsessed with the show, but I know not everybody is like that. Not everybody looks up theories or even watches videos like this. And if you have those people wait another 3 years for a season, the odds of them returning get slimmer and slimmer as the months go by. Anyways, that's just a little rant about TV in general. Now for what you all really want to see. And that's the theories for Season 3.
Previously on Thrifty's Severance Season 1 video.
When Mark yells out,
He's alive!
are they gonna think he's just talking about the baby and be like, oh yeah, Mark, she's all good?
If I may, I really did feel it was clear you were referencing the baby.
So I think it's only natural to start this section off with the obvious question. What happens next? It seems like this is exactly what Mark and Helly are thinking because they truly have nowhere else to go. What's gonna happen to this new army of Innies along with a cornered Milkshake? Well, I think we're gonna see a good old-fashioned workers' strike, except the Innies are just gonna straight up refuse to leave the building. I've been getting in trouble in the comments for spoiling other shows and movies, but I almost expect the 3rd season to play out similarly to the 2nd season of Silo. So if you've seen that, maybe you get what I'm saying. If all these Innies from the departments we've seen, and maybe others that we haven't seen, just flat out refuse to leave, what could Lumen even do about that? It seems that their security detail is either completely depleted or very sparse, and forcing everybody out of the building doesn't really seem like an option. So with this strike, there's a lot of different factors. For one, there's food, sleeping arrangements, because there's only so many tents that Mark S can make, and the fact that probably not everybody is going to go along with this, specifically Dylan G. Dylan's Innie and Outie just shared a pretty heartwarming but indirect moment about their shared love for Gretchen. Would Innie Dylan really deprive her of her husband? Would he deprive the kids of their father? I'm not too sure he would, and even if he would at first, I don't think he'd see the entire strike all the way through. Especially if Gretchen herself came back and talked with him about how much she needs her husband, or perhaps this would just push him in the other direction and make him want to stay more, who knows. Also, this is Lumen we're talking about. They've got all sorts of resources, whether it be the Glasgow block or the overtime contingency. I'm sure there's some sort of further protocol to stop the Innies from existing. Oh wait, there is, because we already saw that happen to Irving. Upon extreme circumstances, I'm sure Lumen could just flip a switch, turn everybody back into their Outie, so what's to stop them from doing that? What's to stop this entire hypothetical rebellion arc from actually starting in the first place? Well, that's where we talk about Mr. Milkshake. Milkshake is at a fork in the road here. He can either continue supporting Lumen and all their inadvertent or advertent racism and talking down to, or he can flip sides and start supporting the Innies. I'm sure the two choices will be far more complex than what I just said, but I think that this rebellion will be sort of keeping Milkshake hostage, and it'll be impossible for them to flip every single person's switch at the same time, or at least I think it will, so they could give Lumen an ultimatum. Don't switch us back, provide us with food and shelter, or Milkshake dies. Now I know that might seem a bit extreme, and it is. We've already seen Mark inadvertently kill someone. We saw that Lorne definitely had the hatred and willingness to kill someone from Lumen. Mark could tell everybody how Drummond literally tried to kill him, so Lumen isn't their friend, and that might fire up enough people to actually want Milkshake dead if the upstairs employees start switching all the Innies off. It's a dark scenario, but where the season 2 finale took us, Mark is technically a murderer now. I never expected the show to really go here, so who knows where else it could go. But as for the fork in the road, I believe that Milkshake himself will also be conflicted towards Lumen. Those seeds were already planted in this season, so I think in the next season we could see a full-fledged turning of the sides. In the hypothetical storyline I've got going on here, maybe they just start switching all the Innies off anyways, regardless of Milkshake being prisoner. He ultimately doesn't die, but he knows that he could've, and Lumen went through with their plan anyways. It would make him realize that Lumen also doesn't care about him. He would hold a major grudge against this company, more so than he does right now. But there's also the very real possibility that Milkshake is getting fired anyway after letting Cold Harbor fail. It's not directly his fault, or at least not all of it is, but the company will be looking for somebody to blame, and Milkshake definitely fits the bill. So ultimately, I think that somehow, someway, Milkshake is gonna turn against Lumen and either help the Innies directly, or just start going against the company, perhaps in a movement of some sort, a movement that might gain some traction because of Gemma. Gemma is out in the real world now, and I expect that she's going to be able to get off of Lumen property with little to no trouble. It would be insanely stupid for the season to end on her getting out just to get recaptured and brought back inside, so Gemma's first logical step would be to go to Devon and Rickens. I don't know, maybe she has other family to go to first, but let's just say for the story's sake, it's Devon and Rickens. How exactly could this become a story for the world to know? Devon said in the season 1 finale that she has some journalist friends that she could write to tell Mark's story. She also has Rickon, her husband, who's an author, but more on him in a bit. The point is, nothing really came out of this larger scale plotline that was set up in season 1. Helly's story didn't get told nationally. Devon either never reached out to her news outlet friends about Mark, or those stories didn't really get picked up. So if Gemma plans on taking her story public, is this the storyline where we're finally going to get some actual public outcry? And how exactly is that going to work? Is this going to turn into The Boys with the really heavy social commentary and people taking Gemma's side or Lumen's side and calling Gemma's story fake news? Is that what people want out of this show? Is that a good route for this show to even take? I'm not so sure, but if this story doesn't at least make the news and get people talking about Lumen, then this whole escape plot will just seem very odd. Gemma escapes, so in season 3 she can just repeat the process and go get Mark back. And then at the end of season 3, she just gets captured again, leaving Mark to have to repeat the process the same as this season. If this story doesn't make headlines, then where exactly is all of this going? Now, let's switch things up a bit more and talk about Lumen. This one isn't so much a theory as it is talking about an answer to a theory, but I think that we can all kind of see now what Lumen's actual goal is in this world. And no, it's not cloning people to live forever, it's not transferring consciousness to the goats, it's not taking swear words out of R-rated movies, but it's to try and create a painless world. Now, usually when you get answers to the really big and heavily theorized questions in any sort of mystery story, the results can feel a bit disappointing. However, in Lumen's case, I actually think that this makes a whole lot of sense and is a pretty satisfying answer. So if their goal is to create a painless world, then people wouldn't have to endure visits to the dentist, flights, writing thank you cards, giving birth, etc. and etc. The big bad evil company is just trying to ease people's suffering. That's a pretty noble thing, right? So maybe Lumen isn't too bad after all. Except Outie Mark makes a point in the finale that I think undercuts this entire thought process.
Like my memories and yours, and my trauma and yours, but the good stuff too.
It sounds cliche, but the bad things in our life is what makes us who we are. All those stories your grandpa tells you about walking uphill both ways to school, yeah, that's what made him the grumpy old fart that he is today. All the bad memories in your life have also shaped who you are, and if Lumen just takes all the pain away, then everybody loses a lot of who they actually are at their core. And when it's put in that context, the show just makes so much more sense thematically. You'll only be half a person, just like the Innies, if you don't experience pain. And with this revelation, it also makes a lot of sense as to why Gemma and potentially Mark were chosen by Lumen for this experiment. Mark took this job so that way he wouldn't have to experience the pain and tragedy of his wife's death. And this whole time, Miss Casey, Mark, and separating the tempers to create more Innies has been one big experiment on both of them to see just how Severance actually works. So overall, I think that this is an excellent answer to the question, what is Lumen's ultimate goal? But this is the theory section, so let's continue down that train of thought. What is the simple, most painful experience for the most powerful people in the world? Well, that would be losing their power. And in a way, you lose a lot of your power when you die. So let's jump right back on board the consciousness train, and let's talk about if Lumen could take these people, say that they're dead, and give them a whole new personality, what's to stop them from changing the looks of that person and giving them the memories of a previous person? If they can separate the four tempers, what if they can eventually enhance this process by separating the tempers from a person's memory and then bringing that person back in a new body? This one might be a bit out there, but that's the fun of making theories, to see 99% of them not come true. So another really big theory presented in this season was the fact that Helly is or would become pregnant. Quite honestly, I expected this to be one of the last things that we learned this season, or that it would be heavily hinted at in the finale, but it ultimately wasn't. So why is this pregnancy theory so big? Well, for one, I'm not going to be explaining the birds and the bees in this video, but it's definitely possible that Helly/Helena could be pregnant. But in addition to this is the Season 2 intro sequence, especially this little baby Kier in front of Mark at the very end. Little baby Kier. If Mark and Helly have a baby, then I guess it would technically be a little baby Kier. Now, I didn't really think too much on this theory up until when James came down to visit Helly. He tells Helly that he sees the fire of Kier inside of her, and that he doesn't really like his daughter Helena, so I guess that's one question answered. Does Helena have daddy issues? Check. But what does this mean for Helly if she actually is pregnant? Regardless of James' feelings towards Helena, if she's pregnant and her Innie is spearheading a revolution in the underbelly of Lumen, then getting her out would take top priority. Maybe even above Milkshake's safety and threats of his death. See, I'm trying to wrap all my theories together in one for a potential storyline. And now comes the rather difficult question that we already sort of saw hinted at back in Season 1.
What are you saying, Natalie, to the woman who became pregnant at work less than a month after her company went severed?
So, whose baby is this really? This becomes especially complicated because Innie Mark had joined vessels with both Helena and Helly. As far as we know, one time each. So both Helly and Helena would have equal claim over that baby, but perhaps the decision won't exactly be up to her. Maybe it'll be up to, I don't know, the old man who has a preference over a child's life and will tell her what she can and can't do with said child. James prefers Helly over Helena, so he'll give the child to Helly, hoping that in exchange for granting her the status of mother, she might take on a bigger responsibility of the company. Now, there's no way in hell that Helly would actually go along with that, but who knows, maybe motherhood will change her, and like Cobell said, there is no happy ending for Mark and Helly. even if there's a baby involved. And if Mark got Helly pregnant and Gemma finds out about this, there's definitely gonna be some complicated emotions there because Gemma couldn't have a baby with Mark, and this other new girl that he chose over her has a baby with him. So maybe everything won't play out exactly like this, but I do think that Helly/Helena is for sure going to eventually become pregnant if she isn't already. Also, I just want to bring this up right here because I'm not sure where else to put it, but I do think in the end game of the show, whether that be next season, season after that, season 10, I don't know, Cobell will be the final main villain. I don't think she's working with Mark and Devon out of the kindness of her heart. She's angry that she isn't getting the credit she deserves at Lumen, and when and if she gets that job back, things are going to change. I still think she wholeheartedly believes in the work that Lumen does, and even if Milkshake or Helena's beliefs falter, Cobell's won't, and she's going to be brought back as the new head of the company once James dies. I also think that next season there will be an episode entirely dedicated to Miss Wong and her time at the school, a bit like this season's Cobell episode. Don't know why, just a gut feeling that I have. Alright, last theory I want to talk about is Rickon's book deal with Lumen. We saw a very human side of Rickon this season in his conversation with Devon about his new book deal with Lumen. He talked about how he hasn't found much success in his career ever, and he'll be getting a lot of money, so he's happy to sacrifice some of his own words and creativity in favor of furthering his career and getting compensated for it. This is really the first time we saw a little bit of what the inside of Devon and Rickon's relationship looks like, and how Rickon isn't always this giant weirdo. He's human, and he makes his own practical choices, even though he hangs out with people with names like Rebecca.
Good night, Rebecca.
But I do think that once Rickon sees Gemma and hears her story, Rickon is going to change his tune incredibly fast. He was already very doubtful of Mark's claims, and he thinks the best of Natalie, and Rickon, out of all the characters, is the easiest one to underestimate. He's mainly here for comedic relief. Almost all of his scenes add a bit of light and levity to an otherwise dark show, and that's fine if that's all he was here for, but I think that's gonna change because of Rickon's book. Rickon is writing a guide for Innies, a heavily edited and Lumen-approved version of his book, The UUR. But what if Rickon were to give the Innies an unedited and Lumen-unapproved version? How he would do this, I have no idea, but this could be what gives the Innies more motivation to keep this rebellion going. Or could it be what dispels the rebellion and gets Mark to finally come out? Now, I think both of these are reaches, but what I don't think is a stretch is something that I talked about earlier, and that's Rickon being the one who gets Gemma's word out there to the people. I ultimately think that Rickon will either give Lumen the copy of his book and take the money in order to sell his new book about Gemma, or he will flat out refuse Lumen's money and take the moral high ground. But with how menacing Lumen can be and how unafraid they are to get rid of people that cause issues, I think that season 3 will be the season of underestimating Rickon, just for him to prove all of us wrong. I think that Rickon is going to fully go along with everything that Lumen wants him to do, even after hearing and meeting with Gemma, and the audience is gonna get mad at him. They're gonna beg Devon to divorce him, say he's the worst character, etc., just for him to double-cross Lumen, get the book on Gemma out there to the world, and then maybe face the repercussions afterwards. What I picture is Lumen coming under fire for this Innie strike, so they go to Rickon and promote his book to the Innies publicly, saying that, oh, the strike is only temporary, look, we're even writing them a book. And then Rickon will win back some good PR faith for Lumen, and then he gets up to read his book on stage, and surprise, surprise, it's not the book made for Innies, it's the opening scene of his book on Gemma. A similar scene in the sense that it'll be like Helly's speech at the end of season 1, but maybe Rickon will be somewhere for the public to see and hear all of this, and if the guy that Lumen was propping up to be really good for the Innies unveils all of Lumen's deep, dark secrets, then there's really no coming back from that. Then everybody who said horrible things about Rickon will cheer and say, oh, I knew Rickon was great, it's so easy to see why Devon picked him, because the internet's gonna internet. Alright, this video went on way longer than I expected it to. I just had a lot to say about this season, and next season, I'm gonna give Severance Season 2 a score of 8.9 out of 10. Thanks to all the channel members. Let me know all of you guys' thoughts in the comments below, your theories for Season 3. You guys are all the best, and I'll see you all in the next one.